Welcome to Project Utopia, the Enlightenment podcast, a production of Utopia University. This podcast is based on the true story of a prince who became king at age 17 and went on to rule an enlightened kingdom for more than 40 years. Throughout the world, this king became known in his time as the Enlightened King, and his capital city was known as the City of Gold. The significance of this king has been completely overlooked by history. It's as if there never was an enlightened king or a city of gold. But I want you to know that this place existed, that the world can be good if we decide to make it good. Governed by enlightened principles, this nation was peaceful, happy, healthy, and abundant. I call it Utopia. The Enlightened King left us with a unique system of enlightenment, and we're going to piece together the teachings that have survived and study this system so that we can open the doorway to enlightenment in our own time. We must ensure that the enlightenment wisdom of Utopia is never lost to history or forgotten ever again. This podcast transmits on the inner wavelength of enlightenment and compassion. You have found this wavelength. You are a seeker of truth, a being of compassion, and a student of enlightenment. Now, open the door to your inner world and let the wisdom of enlightenment work its way into your life. Welcome to Utopia. Hey everyone, welcome to Project Utopia, the Enlightenment podcast. In this first episode, I'm going to introduce you to the Enlightened King, and I'm going to share several important principles of his enlightenment wisdom. So get comfortable, relax, and prepare yourself for the journey. There's an open discussion group where we're going to keep the conversation going about enlightenment. So if you're interested in being part of that conversation, then at the end of the episode, I'll tell you how to join that group. First of all, let's just relax and take some slow, deep breaths. Whatever you're doing. Now, of course, if you're driving, don't close your eyes, but just let go and release all that tension that you're carrying. You came here to expand your self-awareness, to connect at a deeper level. So let's get right to it and start exploring the enlightenment wisdom of Utopia. In ancient times, you could study enlightenment like learning a subject in school. And when you would start studying enlightenment, the very first thing you would have learned is that each of us lives in two worlds. There's an outer world of circumstance. We have a body, we interact with people, and we have obligations and responsibilities. This is our outer world. But there also exists in us an inner world of peace, where everything is good and balanced and abundant. And nobody's ever really explained to us the idea that we have an inner world. It's not valued in our society. It's not something we talk about or teach. We don't even see it as important in our culture. It's never even mentioned. And that's how we grew up. So it makes our job much more difficult. The truth about us is this: we are 100% absorbed into the outer world. And now I'm asking you to reverse that and start connecting with your inner world. So we have our work cut out for us. And for most people, this is a pretty drastic change in how we look at and understand ourselves. Now, ancient civilizations understood this primary truth. We're both an inner being and an outer being. Now, we're quite firmly attached to the outer world, but in ancient times, they understood the existence of both inner and outer and developed knowledge and skills to attach themselves more deeply to the inner world. For example, in ancient India, I'm talking 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, they spoke about the outer world as Maya. Maya is a Sanskrit word that means magic or illusion. In other words, the outer world, the reality that we measure ourselves against, is in fact an illusion, like a magic trick that mysteriously transforms energy into the reality that we experience. So it looks real, it doesn't seem to be an illusion, but it is only energy taking form. Now, if you don't know anything about science, then at least one thing you should know is that Albert Einstein explained this illusion when he proved mathematically that energy and reality are the same thing, and what connects them is light. He said, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. So the smallest atom is in fact bursting with energy and light. The things we see in the outer world, although they appear to us as stable and constant, are in fact ever-changing patterns of energy. Now, how did they know this 5,000 and 10,000 years ago, that our outer world is nothing more than an ever-changing patterns of energy and light? See, I can't answer that question, where this wisdom came from. We're never going to be able to answer that question, but they were right. In the outer world, everything is always changing. It's an illusion. It's out of our control. But in the same way that your outer world is constantly changing, your inner world is still balanced, unchangeable, infinite, and abundant. In the outer world, you're always striving for control, but it's a never-ending effort because it's always changing. So no sooner do you get the whole world lined up exactly the way you want it, then everything changes again and messes up your plans. You can never find balance in the outer world because the outer world itself is always out of balance. It's always changing. But in the inner world, you can come to rest in balance and peace. And now you can start exploring your inner world. You've seen the movie The Matrix. Now, if you haven't watched The Matrix recently, I suggest you at least watch the first movie. The outer world is exactly like the idea of the Matrix. It is an illusion that's pulled over your eyes to hide the truth. You think it's true because you see it, feel it, you experience it. But it's up to each of us to see beneath the illusion into our inner reality. Look around you. People watch the news, they listen to music, they watch videos, scroll through their social media, watch all their sports teams. Then they go to work and they do the same thing over and over every single day. Now, I'm not saying this to be funny or sarcastic, but like in the movie The Matrix, these people are living in the Matrix. They're living in the illusion. They are completely unaware of their inner world. No matter how out of balance they are, no matter how crazy their life is, no matter how emotionally unbalanced they are, no matter how poor they are, unhappy, they don't question their lives because nobody around them questions it. In fact, they'll think you're crazy for saying that you have an inner world. So the goal of this podcast is to help you see that you have been asleep your whole life, unaware that so much of your life is nothing more than unconscious and subconscious habits and routines. You, me, all of us, we've been mindlessly running on autopilot because nobody else is questioning it, so we don't question it. Enlightenment is the process of disrupting this illusion and developing a new and lasting connection with your inner world. When you hear me use the word utopia, I'm really talking about two different things. First, utopia is the name of an historic kingdom of peace and abundance, the Enlightened King, the city of gold. That's the outer part, and I'll tell you a lot more about that kingdom as we go along. But when I use the word utopia, I'm also referring to a place within you, a place of light, an inner world of positive values and principles, an inner world of health and abundance, a world built on thoughts and beliefs, purpose and meaning. Utopia, your inner world, is unlimited and it's always with you. It never leaves you because it's part of you. And that's the inner part. Now, fairly quickly, I can teach you some inner techniques to start grounding yourself and bringing yourself to balance. And you can start to make your own life healthier and more meaningful. And I don't think it really should be any more complicated than that. Enlightenment should be simple. It's not an end game that only 1 in a million can achieve. Enlightenment is the process itself, small daily steps toward self-awareness. The journey to enlightenment should be simple because it's part of your nature. Light is part of your nature. It's who you are. And it immediately will reveal itself when you start to let go of the outer world and look within. So this podcast is about enlightenment. It's about opening a doorway to your inner world and connecting to a part of you that already exists. So let's talk about some of the challenges to enlightenment. Why do so few people pursue enlightenment and even fewer actually make real progress and find success? Well, the first reason is your perspective. It's the perspective of our society. We are 100% invested in the outer world. 100% of everything you think about is measured in terms of the outer world. You've never had the experience of letting go of the outside world. So when you first try to let go, it's a little scary because you've been doing things a certain way for decades. But to enter the inner world, you have to let go of the outer world. It's the same thing. You can't get into the inner world until you start releasing the outer world. I'm asking you to open yourself up to a new way of thinking, a new way of being. And I know that not everyone is ready to do this. A lot of people, they're just not ready to let go of life. They just can't imagine what would happen if they let go. But you have to open yourself to change, which means letting go. And when you let go of your comfortable beliefs, habits, and routines, it generates uncertainty and disruption. And this disruption is uncomfortable, but disruption is the price of admission to the inner world. You've got to disrupt your routines in the outer world in order to start becoming aware of your inner world. It's really similar to the Matrix, the red and the blue pill. You remember that scene. Morpheus said to Neo, he gave him two options. He said, do you want to take the red pill and know the truth and suffer all the disruption and the change that comes with that truth? Or do you want to take the blue pill, forget all this, and go back to sleep comfortable in the illusion? Now, the second reason why the journey to enlightenment is difficult is because all the training, all the skills that you've gotten in the outer world block you from progressing in the inner world. The outer world is all about analyzing, but the inner world requires an ability to flow, analyzing or flowing. You can't do both at the same time. The easiest example to understand is meditation, because meditation is about flowing in your inner world, and it requires that you be still, balanced, relaxed, and self-aware. But if you're like most people, you struggle with meditating because you can't stop analyzing. You can't stop comparing everything and categorizing. You can't stop talking to yourself. And when you bring your outer skills to meditation, you miss the whole purpose. You don't make any connection to the inner world. See, when we meditate, we want to win, achieve the goal, finish the task, master the method, pass the test. We want to make constant progress every day. But wisdom is much more subtle than that. Wisdom was meant to be absorbed into your life, developed over time with constant practice. And unlike the outer world, there is no test. There's no finish line. There's not even a starting line. Everything is gradual, day by day, starting with today, wherever you're starting, cycle by cycle. You keep going until after a few weeks and a few months, you notice that this wisdom has begun to become absorbed into your own life. You've begun the process of change. Some of you may already be on this inner path, and your inner skills may be well developed. For you, this is going to be a platform to deepen your inner work. But for most people, this may be just the start of your journey. So either way, we're going to help you develop and nurture new inner skills. Now, there's one more thing that blocks us from realizing enlightenment, and it may be the most difficult to overcome. Well, hopefully for you, it's going to be easy, but for most people, this is the most difficult thing to overcome. It's an ancient teaching that's been lost, but the Enlightened King actually included this idea in his system of enlightenment. It's the idea of time. Everything in the outer world happens against a backdrop of time. The outer world is an illusion, and time is the magic trick that binds you to the illusion. It makes it seem real. Everything's always changing. Well, of course it's changing because time is changing. See, if there was no time, there would be no change. You could do everything. You could be anywhere. But there is time, and so you are bound to be here. It may not make sense to you at the moment, but in the inner world, you are above time. So you have to let go and disconnect yourself from the pull of time. Let's relax again. Take a few breaths. The inner world of peace, health, balance, and abundance is timeless, and this inner world has been patiently waiting for you to return. Right now, you are above time, and the inner truth is you have all the time in the world. The interesting thing about the inner world is that it's part of you. It's not going to abandon you and go somewhere else. It will always be there for you. It's part of you, so it's always there. And to connect to your inner world, all you have to do is start shifting your thinking. Now, I don't know what you were expecting to hear when you started to listen to this podcast, but take a minute to reflect why you're here. You've been listening for a while now. Why are you listening to this podcast? I think you know why you're here. It's because you know the truth of your inner world. You know that there's more to your life than the pointless noise of the outer world. And I applaud you for being here. Every single one of you. You deserve a lot of credit because despite your struggles to this point in your life, whatever difficulties and disappointments you've had to overcome in your life, you're still here. You're still trying. Somehow, you've kept open the channel to your inner world for all these years. You've never let go of your desire for meaning, purpose, and enlightenment because deep inside, you have kept alive the small, faint voice of peace, health, abundance, and compassion. You are a seeker of light. You are a being of compassion. Light is part of who you are. It is always calling. It is always there for you. Now you will claim this inner part of your being. Now, back to the story of Utopia. Many centuries ago, there existed a kingdom that was known around the world as the Kingdom of Light, and its capital city was known as the City of Gold. It was dazzling. There is no doubt that this kingdom existed and that this capital city was real. But this kingdom is completely overlooked by history, like it never even happened. It's not a part of our education or our shared cultural history. And this is really important to understand how we are programmed by the outer world. See, we can only follow someone or look up to someone or emulate someone if we know about them. History pushes forward certain figures and makes them our heroes. But so many other worthy lives remain hidden from our view, forgotten by time, and everything that they knew is lost to time. Even in modern culture, certain people have a platform or they're given a platform in public. They're pushed forward for our attention, or maybe they succeeded in pushing themselves forward for our attention, whether they have anything of value to offer us or not. These people may not be the best role models, but it's all we see, so we follow them. And this is why so many young people idolize and emulate sports stars and pop stars. It's all they have been shown, so that's all they know. This was the most peaceful and abundant nation in the history of the world, and we don't even know about it because history measures events in the outer world. Births and deaths, battles and revolutions, conquest and power. If a country wasn't invaded, or if there wasn't a war, then it's as if it never even happened. History records the outer world, never the inner world. And that's a limitation on us. That's a mistake. And this podcast is going to reverse that trend. Here, we will highlight the inner world. Now, history does record the fact that there was a great king who ruled for 40 years. And during that time, he brought incalculable wealth to his kingdom. He was known throughout the world as the Enlightened King. This is true. This we know from history. This king created a golden culture of abundance. His capital city was called the City of Gold. In fact, descriptions of the wealth of this kingdom defy belief. But in this podcast, I want to look past the material wealth of the outer kingdom and reveal for you the ancient inner wisdom of enlightenment that the Enlightened King possessed and taught to his people. This Enlightenment wisdom has been overlooked by history, but it's far too valuable a treasure to ever be lost or forgotten again. There's very little actual history of this kingdom. Only some of the key events have been recorded, and we had thought that everything else had been long ago lost to history. But the recent discovery of hundreds of pages of royal documents has brought historians and scholars to take another look. So let's see what we can find out about this 17-year-old prince who later became known around the world as the Enlightened King. What can we really know about his life? Well, one thing we know for sure historically is when the prince was born, his father, we'll call his father the Elder King, was 45 years old, which is very late in life for a king to have a first child. You can almost imagine the joyous celebration throughout the kingdom when news of the prince's birth was announced. By the time the baby prince was born, his father was already a great and wise king in his own right, having already doubled the size of the kingdom. And being the son of a great king, the young prince enjoyed wealth and privilege that we couldn't even understand. You see, in those days, when the king would walk into a room, every person bowed their head and was forbidden to make eye contact. Only members of the immediate royal family were permitted to gaze upon the king's face. So the boy must have thought that his father was an all-powerful giant. Well, in fact, his father was a powerful and noble king. On a personal level, we know from historical records that his mother was a princess from a neighboring kingdom. He was an only child, so she deeply cherished and loved him and taught him compassion from an early age. We also know that the prince was trained in enlightenment from a very early age. Remember I said earlier, in those days, you could actually study enlightenment like a subject in school, and he learned at the feet of the wisest men in China and India, absorbing and practicing several different systems of wisdom. His father, the Elder King, was himself known as one of the wisest men in the world. The Elder King was also enlightened. It is this wisdom of enlightenment that I hope to share with you in this podcast. Now, the prince had all privilege, training, and education. He was instructed in mathematics, astronomy, martial arts, navigation, diplomacy. He was fluent in many languages. As a child, this young prince met emperors, yogis, countless ambassadors and kings. He saw his father deal with all types of men, both wise and foolish, peaceful and ruthless, humble and profane. In fact, it was during his childhood that he accompanied his father, the Elder King, on 3 long voyages that shaped his understanding of all this wisdom. The first voyage was to China when he was 7, the second voyage to Africa when he was 11, and the third voyage to India when he was 14. Almost certainly, these trips would have included an entourage of 100 political aides and several hundred servants. Over land, they would have traveled with huge caravans, and over sea, they would sail with a fleet of no fewer than 16 ships. The young prince would have had his own staff of translators, caretakers, chefs, and bodyguards. At each city, they were welcomed and feasted by kings, and we can only imagine the great and valuable gifts that were exchanged between the royals. So when the Elder King quite suddenly took ill and died, the loss must have been a devastating grief for the young prince, and at the age of 17, the weight of a vast kingdom was now on this young man's shoulders. But rather than turn away from the burden of responsibility, quite the opposite happened. This young man turned out to be exceptional at administration. His father had left him a great and peaceful kingdom, but in truth, on a global scale, it wasn't much more than a sleepy trading post. In the early years of his reign as king, several important events unfolded around the world, and what happened was the power of other nations began to rise and fall, and the Enlightened King built on his father's global friendships and alliances, and he became a valued trading partner and a reliable ally for kings and emperors to the east and to the west. So in a matter of a few short years, helped by a few lucky coincidences of history, he took the minor kingdom that he had inherited and transformed his nation into the center of global trade. And by the end of his reign, 40 years later, the wealth of his kingdom was incalculable. The city of gold, the kingdom of light. Now, you don't hear about this in history books, but during his reign as king, and we'll talk about all this, he established enlightened rules of government and business. He built huge warehouse facilities to accommodate increased trade, and he devised systems of scheduling, logistics, and transportation that would rival any modern business today. He created, for lack of a better word, hotels and large restaurants where traders would be feasted and entertained while they stayed. Year after year, the legends of this kingdom's hospitality made their way around the world, and with every year for 40 years, the volume of trade flowing through this nation multiplied and multiplied and multiplied again. But as efficiently as he had attended to the business of the kingdom, he never stopped studying wisdom. And this is really the important part of the story. He built his outer kingdom by mastering inner wisdom. And as it turned out, when these writings were discovered, this king was both a prolific student and a great teacher of enlightenment. In the very first years of his reign, he took the time to compile all the systems of wisdom that he had learned in his youth, and he carefully merged all that wisdom to create his own system of enlightenment. And when I talk about enlightenment, this is very important to understand. Until this king, the only way to become enlightened had been to isolate yourself from society, maybe in a temple or a school or a monastery, or live on a mountaintop away from the world. See, in those days, in order to achieve enlightenment, you had to remove yourself from all attachments to the world in order to properly quiet your mind and train your body. You were considered of the world if you had earthly attachments, such as a job or a business, or you were married or had children. If you were attached in any way to the relationships and obligations of the outer world, then the deepest experiences of enlightenment would be unattainable for you. Now, of course, in our modern world, this would exclude all of us from experiencing enlightenment because we all have many attachments. You had to be a yogi or a monk or a traveling teacher or become a recluse. Only those who could give up all earthly attachments could attain enlightenment because that's what it took to fully develop their inner abilities. But the Enlightened King taught something different, and this is the most important message I can share with you from the totality of his writings. He said that you do not have to separate yourself from the world to become enlightened. He explained that you can become enlightened while still embracing your worldly relationships and responsibilities if you embrace those relationships and obligations in an enlightened way. It's not the attachments that are keeping you from enlightenment, he said. It's how you handle them and how you allow them to affect you. So he actually devised a system of enlightenment. It still makes perfect sense today that can be achieved by anyone in any circumstances. And of course, he used the system of enlightenment himself, but he also taught the system to his own people. From the time he was a child, he had met and studied with Buddhist monks and Indian yogis and Taoist masters who required their students to give up all attachments, to release all thoughts, and even the smallest desires. Years later, as king, he asked these questions. He asked, what purpose to master your inner nature by turning your back to the world and hiding your inner light? Better to share your light in this world, and through enlightened action, the world will find balance. Do the most good, the Enlightened King. He also asked this question, what purpose to think no thoughts or take no actions? Better to guide your thoughts to noble purpose so your enlightened actions become a channel to help others. That's just a few lines from hundreds of writings and documents recently uncovered that have brought this king to the attention of the whole world. He created a system of enlightenment that allows you to cultivate an inner platform, and from this inner platform, the outer world can be changed. He said, in fact, that all of us have this inner platform, but we waste the power because we do not guide it in any specific direction. He said, go within, seek your light, then return to the world with love and compassion. We have plenty of time to go through all this, and there's much more to share, but let's pause for one moment and reflect. What the Enlightened King understood, and you and I also understand this, is that none of us will ever be able to separate ourselves from the reality of our own life. And the truth is, we don't want to separate ourselves from the life we have. We just want the life we have to be better, happier, more peaceful, healthier, more abundant. In his system, he said it's okay to live life. It's okay to love and to grieve. It's okay to work, to care for your children, to enjoy good food, to love your family. In fact, it's important that you do these things, but take all your actions under the umbrella of enlightenment. Over and over again, he uses the word enlightened actions, suggesting that your inner intentions are the source of your actions. And if you have enlightened intentions from the inside, then your actions will become a channel to help others. You have the power to change from within, to completely change your thoughts and intentions. And when you make those inner changes, when you change yourself from the inside, your outer words and your outer actions will make the world a better place for you and others around you. And never, ever underestimate the power that you have to become a source of inspiration to others. Life is a choice, and it's always been a choice. You just need a little guidance, a little bit of a moral compass, a direction to apply yourself. And that's what I hope this podcast is going to help you with. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and frankly, it's difficult to know the best place to begin, but no matter where I start, wisdom is always going to come around full circle again. Here's how we've started the journey so far. You've met the Enlightened King, and we've briefly mentioned his unique system of enlightenment that's open to all people. You've been introduced to the idea of exploring an inner world of peace, balance, health, and abundance. You understand that the outer world binds you very tightly to this illusion through unconscious habits and beliefs that you've held for decades. And so this journey is not going to be easy for most people because it will require some change and a certain level of disruption to make that change. You see the possibility of seeking enlightenment while still being of the world, which is a message we all need today. And you heard the King's teaching about enlightened intentions, which create enlightened thoughts, which generate enlightened actions, and those actions become a channel to help others. Now, for those who are interested in keeping this conversation, as I promised, I've set up a discussion group where we can stay connected to the inner world 24 hours a day and just talk about enlightenment, and you are invited. To join this free discussion, go to Utopia University, www.utopiauniversity.org, and check back for the next episode, and we'll see where this Enlightened King is going to take us next on our journey to self-awareness.